Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But today is the 12th of April, 2022. These are the stories that we'll be discussing during the course of the show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the updates as far as Ukraine is concerned, whether it be the increase in the Russia-US tensions or the increase in Russia-Ukraine tensions, whether it be Russia that has completed its build-up for an assault on Ukraine's eastern Donbas region, which has been stated by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, or that the Ukrainian rights groups that says that Russian soldiers are using rape as a weapon of war, or Austrian Chancellor says that his meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow did not leave him optimistic. This and more will be discussed during the first segment today. In our second story, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about Palestine and Israel. Palestinians on Monday have criticized a decision a day earlier by the Israeli Supreme Court as a piracy of the Palestinian Authority's finances and a collective punishment against the Palestinian people by the Israeli extremists and right-wing groups. And of course, this is a decision that has been taken by Israel so that the Palestinian authorities pay for all those who've been injured or who have been killed. Also, 2 Palestinian women have been killed by the Israeli forces in separate incidents in the occupied West Bank, and this raises the number of casualties with every passing day. This is going to be our second story, ladies and gentlemen. Then our third story of the day concerns Sri Lanka, that has defaulted on all the foreign debt. Crisis-stricken Sri Lanka has defaulted on $51 billion of external debt on Tuesday, and this it called this move as a last resort after running out of foreign exchange to import desperately needed goods. Now, this is of course the worst economic crisis that the country is grappling with since its independence in 1948. Then our last story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the first death anniversary of renowned journalist and human rights activist I.A. Rehman. He was not only an iconic human rights defender but also a very renowned journalist. He always talked about the rights of the people, the rights of the common man, and he's being remembered today on his first death anniversary. Let's begin with our first segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the updates as far as the Ukrainian crisis is concerned, whether it be the West still putting pressure on Russia through one embargo or the other, or sanctions, or whether it be Russia continuing in its attempt to get hold of eastern Ukraine, or Ukraine talking about the human rights casualties. We've been joined by Dr. Farah Naz, who's an international rights expert, international relations expert rather. Dr. Farah Naz, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Farah, tell us a little bit about what you feel is going to happen in the next few days. We know that the amount of pressure is rising on Ukraine, but that is not deterring the Russians from occupying more and more land within Ukraine. Although it has left some part of Ukraine, it is now trying to occupy the eastern Ukrainian side. Do you feel it will succeed in its attempt?
Thank you, Omar, for having me. The issue is getting more and more intense with each passing day, and as we have been looking at it in the past few months, initially it was only Ukraine, Russia, America, of course, they were involved in, but now many other states are also involved in it, where dependence on Ukrainian wheat and the energy problem that is arising in Europe, I think it's gaining momentum nowadays. I thought that probably the heat will not be felt here in the Indian subcontinent, but now the heat is even felt here when 13 million barrels of discounted Russian oil by India. It led to a serious kind of consequences for the Indian government by America, where Prime Minister was asked by Biden that you are not supposed to get involved in any sort of Russian businesses. So that led towards problems with the Indian Prime Minister and President Biden. And we could see that for the very first time, it was written on the American embassy in India, where it was stated by the right wing that no more bullying is acceptable to us, and we are a liberal independent state, and we are free to do anything, whatever we want to. So the heat of the conflict of the Ukraine is becoming more and more stronger with each and every passing phases. And now, as you mentioned in the beginning, that it's not only rape which is gaining momentum, but the use of chemical weapons and biological weapons is also becoming popular. So here, the problem is that there is no evidence coming up to. This is now the age of hybrid warfare, where misinformation, disinformation, fake news, where one party says that this has happened, another party is completely denying the facts and figures. So who is right, who is wrong, who is actually going to say that whatever one party is saying is actually acceptable or not, it is really becoming debatable because the actors involved, they themselves, they are coming up with some sort of confusion, which is leading towards that whether whatever the Western parties they are saying is not justified. So the issue is getting complex, and it is not getting clearer for all of us analysts to
Dr.
understand
Farah
what
Naz, in
actually
this
is
whole
happening.
complexity of the situation, there's also the human rights angle, the humanity
Yes.
angle that is extremely important. We see the number of casualties, and now the Ukrainian rights group says the Russian soldiers are using rape as a weapon of war. Also, the executive director of United Nations Women, Seema Bahous, says that her agency is hearing reports of rape and sexual violence in Ukraine, and also human trafficking, especially of young women and unaccompanied teenagers, which is also a rising concern. Then, of course, the casualties that have happened, especially in Bucha, and whereas on one side, the Ukrainian side says they are in the thousands. We've seen the images. The Russian side denies that it is behind it. What's really going on in your point of view?
In war, usually such kind of things happen. If we deny it completely, I think that would be wrong. But if it is really happening in Ukraine or not, I think it is really becoming debatable. Because it's not only, as I mentioned earlier, it's not only about the rape culture. It is also about the use of biological and chemical weapons as well, where
True, true,
the
true.
Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister, Hannah, she said today that Kyiv was checking unverified information for the use of phosphorus used by the Russian forces, and
But
they
Dr.
did
Farnaz,
not
at the end
provide
of it
any
all, isn't
evidence.
it the human beings, is it the civilians that are at a loss? I mean, whether it be
There's human
economically
suffering.
or in form of casualties, loss of lives, isn't it the
Yes.
civilians that are the ultimate losers in all of this?
Um, it's the consequences and the impact of war, the all this misinformation, disinformation, and all this rivalry. Human suffering is at the cost. So they are, paying the brunt of the entire Ukrainian crisis. Now, if we talk about that, whether this crisis has an end or not, we need to see agenda of the parties involved, and it's clear cut now that Ukraine is used as a tool by America to isolate Russia in international politics, and we have seen it. The amount of sanctions that are coming along, and
True.
the amount of pressure that is coming on different countries, independent countries, for
I mean, the
having any
latest
sort
being
of
the oil
bilateral
embargo on
relations.
Russia that is being discussed by the European Union, although no decision has been taken as of yet. But of course, this embargo will take place sooner or later.
Yes. So all of this is leading towards that what is the ultimate goal, what is the agenda of the United States in terms of the Ukrainian crisis. When we talk about, I was really hopeful that probably diplomatic solution is possible, and that could be one of the easiest way to resolve the humanitarian sufferings that is coming out due to this entire Ukrainian crisis. But on the face of it, it looks like that probably diplomatic solution is a fancy term, but it is not possible because the way America is approaching and putting restrictions on all different states for having any sort of relations with Russia, Pakistan has paid a huge price. India is paying a price, and Europe is paying a price, and African states, they are paying a price to that.
Now, you
Why
talked of
and what
Europe.
for?
Let's also, I'd also like to have your opinion as far as the Austrian Chancellor's meeting with Vladimir Putin is concerned. We know that Austria is not a part of NATO, and that is why the Austrian Chancellor went and met with Vladimir Putin to kind of find some kind of a solution or move ahead as far as this current crisis is concerned. But he is not very optimistic after these talks. At the same time, we also hear Russian side saying that despite any peace negotiations or talks that might move ahead, there is going to be no cessation of war activities or the aggression that is happening in the region. How do you see that?
There's always an action reaction phenomena. If America is putting more and more sanctions on Russia, Russia will not stop its escalation. It will lead towards more and more, and I think the heat will be seen more strongly. So the catastrophic situation that is emerging, where human beings are affected, no matter if it is Ukraine or it's Europe or any other part of the world, because now the heat of the conflict is felt all over. And initially, we were thinking that probably this conflict would be limited only to Ukraine and Europe. Maybe other regions will not be affected with it. But now we can see other region states are also becoming a target of it. And Europe, in particular, is going to pay a huge price because it was deeply connected and associated with the energy that was coming from Ukraine and Russia, and it was getting supplied there. So, in that whole scenario, the issue is not moving towards resolution. And if I, as an analyst, if I look at that, why, what for, being a realist or from realist perspective, I think for America, it is in their supreme interest that they have to isolate Russia, because if they want to sustain their unipolarity, they have to put pressures on other powerful countries who are like Russia and China to not to emerge as competitors of the unipolar world. So in that, America will do its level best not to let Russia come back to the position that it was, and Russia will not accept its fall there. So it's like, a competition of the superpowers where they are not accepting the other power position in the world dynamics.
Now, despite all of this situation and these tensions between the West and Russia, we also see that as per the Interfax news agency, the Russian gas company Gazprom is still supplying natural gas to Europe. Do you feel this is something that is going to continue on the sidelines, or will it also come to an end at some time?
For the time being, I think it will continue because there is no other way. As in terms of grains and wheat, I think they are now counting more on the other sources, like, opening bids against the North American side. So for gas, they need to find a solution. And I think immediate solution is not possible at this stage. So the same arrangement has to be taken in place the same way. But now coming over to paying the prices to that, because American dollars are no more acceptable to Russia, and at the same time, the Russian banking system is not open for payments by the European market, where Russian government says that they are paying prices to that, and there's a cost involved, so they cannot give it for free and on loan prices. So what actually is going to happen? It is leading to economic, downfall there, which is not acceptable to the Russian part. So what other arrangements are possible and in place? I think nothing is available there. And the ultimate target and the ultimate agenda is to put pressure on Russia that come to terms with us and agree. But Russia I don't think so. Russia is going to accept that. That probably is the only reason that Russian aggression is pretty much seen there. And there was also news about that there is a drone attack happened as well, which was spreading some sort of poisonous gases around. But still, there is no evidence involved, and they are not able to come up with concrete evidence to say that Russia is involved in the use of weapons, chemical weapons against the Ukrainians.
No proof has yet been found. No concrete proof is yet there. Nevertheless, if I come to the latest information, the Russian president is meeting his Belarusian counterpart, and of course, they're going to discuss the military deployment. We know that the Russian troops are withdrawing from other parts of Ukraine and are going towards the eastern Ukrainian side. Do you feel that they will be able to occupy the eastern Ukrainian side? Because, of course, we know very well that there are certain states within eastern Ukraine that have declared independence.
I think that particular part is the bone of contention between Ukraine and Russia. So Russia, initially, I think the plan was, to control and kind of pass on the message to Ukraine and to particularly America that if you try to come on our way, we know how to fix things around. So if the sanctions and the pressure is not stopping and it keeps escalating, I think Russia will also move towards the region which is really under conflict. So it will move on. It will not stop.
All right.
That's what I believe.
Dr. Farah Naz, you talked about information, disinformation, misinformation. I'd like to quote something from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIJ, that we know very well, who have made public new information about shell companies that are linked to more than 800 Russians as part of a broader effort to spotlight offshore hidden wealth of Kremlin-linked figures in the wake of course, this invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Do you feel this is going to affect these people who have been unearthed by the ICIJ, because we know of the reputation of the ICIJ with its past as well, whether it be the Pandora Papers in the past, and now these papers are known as Pandora Papers Russia?
2022, I think altogether is a year where many unfinished agendas are opening up. Many people
True.
who are involved in such kind of atrocities or who were playing under the table games, I think it's time. I think it's some natural arrangement or whatever, but several things are becoming disclosed, and it will really raise serious concerns about the ICJ and it's the way it operates. And if there was any such involved, if it is not disinformation, first of all, so it will lead towards serious consequences. And I think all these organizations will be held accountable for such kind of atrocities if it is really, really involved in such kind of things. But Omar, as you're aware of, that in hybrid age, and hybrid warfare, it's I think the whatever way you can justify your means, it is acceptable. So in media and in social media age, I think the way narratives are formed, the way information is spread, and the way information is made accessible to the general public, so it has a stronger impact. By the time things get clarified, it takes time. So we can see straight away the way you even in this Ukrainian conflicting situation, the way messages are coming and there is a drone attack, and then later on there is no proof available. There is a chemical attack. There is no proof available. There is this rape thing. There is no, absolute proof available. So certain things are really, really leading towards problematic situation for not only for Ukraine and Russia, but for the powerful countries like America as well.
All right, and of course, you spoke of Iraq. Apparently, as per certain sections of the news, it is being stated that Iraq is providing military hardware to Russia, but that needs to be confirmed as well. Nevertheless, you talked about the United States and India and Joe Biden, who has had a constructive talk with Narendra Modi as far as exerting pressure on Russia is concerned. Do you feel that a country like India, that is taking the best or the most advantage of both the countries, that is Russia and the United States, in this current scenario, will cede to US demands?
I don't think so, that it will see to US demands, because whatever is in the best interest of India, it will be doing it, and it has been doing it in the past even. And when it comes to America showing eyes to India, I think it has always been like, one of the most favorite child of America. So America will not do anything to affect it, but it will really try to stop it. But I don't think so it will be able to really stop India for getting involved into such kind of trade partnership with Russia, because whatever India is getting benefit of, it will do it. Now, you also mentioned Iraq providing a weaponry to Russia. It's not only Iraq, but Tehran involvement as well. So the game has become more complex, and there are many actors involved now. Initially, it was only Russia, Ukraine, and America. But now it is the Asia part, and now we can see Iran interest in it. We can see even Israel interest in it, because there is news coming up where Naftali Bennett is mentioning that he is more concerned about Jews who are there and stuck in the conflict, and the ground realities are quite complex. So if all these states, powerful states, if they have their stakes involved, where Europe based, it's involved in terms of its energy crisis and all, and it really need to have access to the cheapest means and all. So if all states are involved and the issue is not resolving through diplomatic means, what will happen? I think America needs to learn it, that it's not only America who matters in the global politics. It is all states who are equally important. And we are accepting the fact that America is a powerful country, but the power should be not extended and misused in such a fashion that it leads towards problems for all players who are
True.
involved or who are important in the global politics. Because end of the day, in international politics, all states have to rely and count on one another, because for our imports and exports, for our energy needs, our requirements, from our food to our basic necessities, we count on one another. So if America asks us that you should, keep starving or don't have terms with a particular country, I think that's not going to serve the interest of the larger states. And all states, including Israel, I think it will not let Iran getting involved and helping and supporting Russia indirectly or directly, if it happens, I think it will be a direct threat to Israel, and Israel will not accept it. So the issue altogether is getting very, very complex, and I think America should understand its complexity and come to terms for a diplomatic solution to the problem and set aside its agenda of isolating Russia at this stage, because I think the world cannot afford another war. And one thing,
But
and
isn't the
secondly,
world already under a beginning of one kind of a war, if I can be so blunt so as to say? I'd like to talk about Mariupol as well. The mayor of Mariupol says that more than 10,000 civilians have died in the besieged Ukrainian port city since the start of the invasion. Also, the head of the Russian Republic of Chechnya says there will be a Russian offensive not only in Mariupol, but also on Kiev and other cities. Of course, we also know about the casualties, not only on the Ukrainian side, but also on the Russian side as well. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reports that since the Russian invasion began, until the 12th of April, Russia has lost 19,500 personnel, 732 tanks and 157 aircraft. So casualties and of course losses on the both sides. But you yourself said that this is part and parcel of such an aggression or such a warlike situation in and between any two countries. But what if this aggravates, Dr. Farah? What happens then? We are already seeing the repercussions in different countries across the world, whether it be in Europe, whether it be in Asia, and even countries, developing countries such as ours will be seeing the repercussions of it in economic terms or other terms as well. What needs to be done now in your point of view, and who needs to be the principal actor in order to bring some kind of a negotiated solution to this current crisis?
I will just add one more thing to what you
All
have
right.
stated before, and after that, we will move on to what should be done. I think
Okay.
it's the consequences is not only economic problems, sanctions, and all of that. I think it is adding on to the existing humanitarian crisis in the world. Of course, Ukraine crisis and Ukrainians, the sufferings, it is really not acceptable on both sides, Ukraine and Russia. But it is also adding on to the existing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen. And all those people who were, other than the Ukrainian conflict, who really wanted and were requesting for attention to overcome the problems that they were facing, I think they have been neglected. So,
All right. Dr. Farah Naz will continue our discussion, but it's time for a short break. Stay tuned. Now, our second segment of the day, of course, after the first, and we'd like to thank Dr. Farah Naz for her contribution to that. Our second segment concerns what Israel is perpetrating on the Palestinians, whether it be on the people or whether it be on the Palestinian Authority on the people. The number of casualties keep on increasing by every day. On the Palestinian Authority, there is a 68-page Supreme Court decision which opens the door for families of Israeli victims of terrorist attacks to ask for compensation from the Palestinians. More in the following report.
The unabated bloodshed in the occupied Palestine continues as Israel escalates its imperial ambitions. After a string of deadly violence, Israeli soldiers shot and killed 2 Palestinian women, sparking widespread outrage in the Arab world. No weapon was found on the body of Ghadir Sabatin, blighted with poor vision, a widow and mother of 6, and was killed in cold blood by occupying forces, while the second victim was killed by Israeli soldiers in the city of Hebron, near Ibrahimi Mosque. The killings happened after Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett granted all security forces full freedom of operations in the occupied region. This order translated into more raids, more detentions, and certainly much more restrictions for those Palestinians who cross separation barrier on a daily basis to get to their jobs inside Israel. Last year, protests took place throughout Ramadan against the illegal eviction of Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Israel captured the West Bank in 1967 Middle East war and has established dozens of illegal settlements where nearly 500,000 settlers reside, often under heavy Israeli military protection. Settler attacks against Palestinians and their property are a regular occurrence in the occupied West Bank as well as in occupied East Jerusalem.
Dr. Manzoor Afridi, who is a Foreign Affairs expert, joins us online. Manzoor Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Let's begin with the casualties. I mean, the two casualties that we were talking about in the very beginning while introducing the segment, whether it be in Bethlehem or in Hebron, they talk of this increased spate of terror-related activities. In addition to what has been happening on the Palestinian lands, the occupation of the Palestinian lands, and so on and so forth. Do you feel there is some end in sight or some respite?
Israel, no doubt, it is an aggressor on the Palestinian land, and all the wars and violence that has been carried out by the Israelis, and no doubt the international community or the big powers, they have the backing of Israel. In this case, it is just the expansion of the violence have the Israeli leaders, they want to increase, and by this to have a kind of pressure to be beared on the Palestinians, because some of the groups from Palestine like Islamic Jihad or Hamas, sometimes they give a tough time to Israel. So now in this holy month of Ramadan, Israelis, they are trying to have more casualties to the Palestinians, and at the one excuse or the other, for example, they said that there are some terror attacks from the Palestinians which are baseless, because they are the unarmed people, how they can carry such attacks, but they want to pressurize them and to have more expansion, not only in territory but also the psychological dimension, we can say, and to pressurize them more and more. So in this holy month of Ramzan, by targeting the innocent Palestinians, anyone, they are female, they are women. So
but Dr. Manzoor, you talk of the holy month of Ramzan. You remember last year in May what happened, the 11 days of constant besiege of the Palestinians by the Israelis, and this 11 days, I mean, what is happening even now again in the holy month of Ramzan kind of reminds us of this gruesome reality that Israel is not going to stop at any time. What can be done in order to stop it?
Well, the international community has to come forward, all the international bodies, the human rights organizations who are working really to safeguard and protect the human rights regardless of religion, territory, race or color or ethnicity. So if they are humans, of course, then they have to come forward for this reason. We know that mercilessly the Israelis, they are killing Palestinians, and it's not for new, it's not recent. For so many years, for so many decades, this violence and this brutality, it has been continued by the Israeli leaders. And especially, just you pointed out that even last year there was a siege of the Palestinians in the holy month of Ramadan. They targeted the Palestinians, and it is there is no discrimination by targeting them. I mean, they kill the young people, they kill old, they kill women, they kill even the children, and all of them, they are innocent. I mean, without any arms, without holding arms, they are unarmed. So no doubt that if we see the silence of the international community, of the international organizations, the United Nations, so we can understand that it is the double standard policies.
Now, Dr. Manzoor Afridi, Israel takes any and every opportunity to incur further violence on the people. If you remember the last Thursday's incident in which allegedly there was a Palestinian man who killed 3 Israelis and wounded more than a dozen others in a Tel Aviv nightlife area. And following that, we have seen the statement by the Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett also, who has given the security agencies full freedom to end this violence that has surged in order to defeat terror. Now, I mean, who is to blame for this terror and who will be blamed if the Israeli authorities continue their violence unabated? And they say this is as a result of an incident that happened last Thursday, and their Prime Minister has given them full freedom to do whatever they want.
Well, who is to be blamed? Of course, Israel. Who is to be blamed? The Israeli leaders, the Israeli security agencies, and the whole infrastructure. I mean, the Israeli, the state machinery. They have to be blamed because the Palestinians, even their land that has been grabbed by the Israelis, by the Jews, and if we compare the land in 1947, then to the second Arab-Israel War, 1967, then to the third Arab-Israel War, 1973, and even after that, especially if we see in 2018 and 2017, when there was a new settlement of the Jews on the Palestinians' lands. So who is the aggressor? We can understand that who is the exploiter. Of course, that is Israel. On the other hand, the Palestinians, then they are unarmed people. They have no weapons, and even they are now homeless, and many of them, thousands and even millions of them, they are refugees in Jordan, in Syria, in Egypt, and other Arab states. So in this scenario, if we talk who created this terrorism or this terror or terror regime, of course that is Israel, and all the lobbies who are working for the interests of Jews, for the interests of Israel, whether those are sitting inside or in Israel, or they are in other countries of the world, or in the United States, or that they are working in the media groups or businessmen, or they are working in the international organizations like the United Nations. So they are creating such kind of things, and they are having just pretext, and they wanted to have the act of the Palestinians. They provoke Palestinians by targeting them, and then the Palestinians, they have no way but only to safeguard themselves and only to have counter attacks, and even they are throwing stones. They have no arms. So Israel is a terrorist state. Israel has created terror, and it is Israel who is behind all these terror activities.
Dr. Manzoor, till which time do you feel that the world will stay silent on these activities, whether it be, as you yourself said, the intensification of land seizures, whether it be the burning of Palestinian olive groves, mass detention, incarceration of politically active groups, and then we also hear of news that another wall of around 40 kilometers will be built as a separation barrier near Tulkarem in the West Bank. This, and then of course so many other measures. And I'd also like to have your point of view on the Supreme Court decision, the Israeli Supreme Court decision that has come out, that instead of helping the Palestinians, says that Palestinians now need to pay as dues to the families of the Israelis who have either been injured or killed as a result of this conflict. How do you feel all of these activities combined can further deteriorate the situation? And I'll bring myself back to the first part of the question, till which point will the world stay silent?
It is very much unfortunate that all the peace efforts, what have been done from the Palestinian side or from the some other the third parties in the world, those who are failed and those who are deadly and badly failed mainly because of Israel. They are not willing to have such compromise or peace agreement with the Palestinians. And second, what you talked about the conscious of the international community and have their silence that can be broken. So it is again very much unfortunate that all the things. I think the most terror hit area in the world, what I understand, that is the Palestinian area and the territory, the people who are most suffered from terrorism. I think on the one side, if that is Afghanistan, but on the other side, that is the Israel. And Israel, it is again very much unfortunate that it is for the last 74 or 75 years since 1947 and 14, and it is the continuation of this terror. So the international community only will raise its voice or will be awakened from its hibernation when when there is interest, their own interest, their bilateral interest with the Israel or with the Palestine or their own interest have they could develop. But when their interest fulfills or when there is no lack of interest from themselves, then of course they will not raise their eyes. So the homes of Palestinians, they are burnt, they became homeless, they became refugees. And about the infrastructure, if you see the hospitals, the schools, all the educational institutions and all kind of infrastructure, they have been bombed.
Of course, the list is endless, Dr. Manzoor Afridi. The list is endless when it comes to these atrocities perpetrated by, Israel, not since now, but since decades. All we can here do is talk about it and highlight it politically as much as we can, diplomatically as much as we can. But the real conscience that needs to be awoken is that of the West, of those countries that are openly supporting Israel. At least they need to pressurize Israel to stop these barbarities against the Palestinians and continuous conflict and continuous pressure on these people who are slowly and steadily losing all of their lands and their lives as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Manzoor Afridi, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the latest emanating from Palestine. Let's come very quickly to our last two stories. The first is a very unfortunate story that comes all the way from Sri Lanka. As a result of the current economic crisis that has engulfed Sri Lanka, we know about the long queues, we know about protests, we know about the electricity shutdowns as well, and now Sri Lanka has defaulted on its 51 billion external debt. It calls this move a last resort after running out of foreign exchange reserves to import desperately needed goods. Now, we all know that Sri Lanka is grappling with the worst economic disaster the country has seen since its independence in 1948. The Sri Lankan government says that the debt default has been made to ensure fair and equitable treatment of all creditors. And this is, of course, ahead of an International Monetary Fund assisted recovery program for the South Asian country. The IMF has said it is going to help this country out. Let's see how it helps it. The crisis has, of course, caused misery for the 22 million people that currently live in Sri Lanka, and it has led to weeks of government protests. We wish our Sri Lankan brothers all the very best. We are there for you, and we will try our level best, inshallah ta'ala, wherever and however we can, to help our Sri Lankan brothers who are in desperate need as we speak. And our last story, ladies and gentlemen, is about the first death anniversary of renowned human rights activist and journalist I.A. Rehman. He was an iconic human rights defender. He passed away last year on this very day at the age of 90. He was born in 1930 in Haryana in India. He then came to Pakistan after independence, and he has written 3 books on peace between Pakistan and India. And he has also spent all his life defending human rights, opposing dictatorial regimes, fighting for the rule of law and democracy. And he has always been a very strong voice for the country's minorities, including Christians and Hindus as well. And the outpour came from across Pakistan when he passed away on this very day last year. People called him that icon of human rights that has now left us. But of course, his work remains with us, and his legacy remains with us. And we hope that more such IR Rehmans can come forward and work for the benefit of our society and our country. May his soul rest in eternal peace. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new story segments.